So now let's look at the attack database connectivity. Database connection strings are used to connect applications to database engines. The connection string is an expression that contains the parameters required for the applications to connect a database server. In terms of SQL Server, connection strings include the server instance, database name, authentication details, and some other settings to communicate with the database server. For example, server is equal to server box. Sorry, server is equal to sequence box. So, so this is the server instance, and then database is equal to common. This is the database name, and then the authentication details. User ID is equal to UID. PWD is equal to password. So this is how you can connect to a SQL server called SQL box, in which the database name is common using the UID and password. So now in these attacks, attackers target a database connection that forms a link between a database server and its client software. Attacking data connectivity can result in unauthorized control over the database. Attacks on data connectivity provide attackers with access to sensitive database information. Database connectivity attack exploits the way in which applications connect to the database instead of abusing database queries. For this purpose, use methods such as connection string injection attack, hash stealing, port scanning, and hijacking web credential. So data connectivity attacks are of the following types: connection string injection, connection string parameter pollution attacks, connection pool DOS. So let's look at connection string injection. A connection string injection attack occurs when the server uses dynamic string concatenation to build connection strings based on the user input. So the user will be entering some data into the some fields, right? So there, the attacker will try to use this connection string injection. If the server does not validate the string and does not allow the malicious text or characters to escape, an attacker can potentially access sensitive data or other resources on the server. For example, an attacker could mount an attack by supplying a semicolon and appending an additional value. So since the connection strings contains a set of value key pairs separated by semicolons, so the attacker in the input field he can supply a command by entering a semicolon and appending an additional value. So the attacker parses the connection string using the last one wins algorithm and substitutes a legitimate value with hostile input. Yeah, so the connection string builder classes can eliminate guesswork and protect the server from syntax errors and security vulnerabilities. They provide methods and properties corresponding to well-known key value pairs permitted by each provider. Each class maintains a fixed collection of synonyms and can translate a synonym into corresponding well-known key name. The server checks for valid key value pairs and an invalid pair throws an exception. In addition, it handles the injected value in a safe manner. The attackers can easily inject parameters by adding a semicolon using connection string injection techniques in a delegated authentication environment. So in the following example, the system asks the user to give a username and password for creating a connection string. Here, the attacker enters the password as password semicolon encryption is equal to off. This means the attacker has avoided the encryption system. So when the connection string is populated, the encryption value will be added to the previously configured set of parameter. As you can see here, the attacker has appended encryption is equal to off at the end. So the summary: connection strings are used by web applications to connect to database engines. It consists of key value pairs. The value is always a string. Each key value pair is separated by semicolon. Note the syntax used on these strings depends on the database engine to be connected and on the provider or driver used by the programmer to establish connection. The attacker can intercept and inject the values of some keys. Last one mean if any key has some value and the same key is set to another value later, then the last value will be considered. The attacker uses this vulnerability to change important keys so that he can gain illegal access to the database, etc. So now, so after looking at the connection string injection, let's see connection string parameter pollution (CSPP) attacks. As an example scenario to illustrate these attacks, a web application where a user value and a password value are required is served by Microsoft IaaS web server running on Microsoft Windows Server. The application user credentials are going to be used to create a connection string to a Microsoft SQL Server database as follows. So data source will be set to SQL 2005. Initial catalog is equal to DB1. Integrated security is equal to no. User ID is equal to user value plus password is equal to password value. This connection string shows how the application is connected to Microsoft SQL Server database engine. Knowing this, an attacker can perform a connection string parameter pollution attack. The idea of this attack is to add a parameter to the connection string with the desired value, regardless of it is already was in the string or the value with which was set up. The component used by .NET applications to craft the connection string will use the value of the last occurrence of the parameter in the connection string. If the connection string has two parameters, which key is data source, the value used will be the one of the last of the two pairs, which allows the following CSPP attack vectors. So the connection string parameter pollution, there are again three types. So one is hash stealing, two port scanning, and then hijack web credentials. So an attacker can place a rogue Microsoft SQL server connected to the internet with a Microsoft SQL server credential sniffer listening. In this example, Kane has been used. Kane is the sniffer, Microsoft SQL credential sniffer. So in this example, the Kane is used to sniff. So an attacker would perform a CSPP attack as follows. So user value data source is equal to rogue server password value integrated security is equal to true. So resulting in the following connection string. Data source is equal to SQL 2005. Initial catalog is equal to DB1. Integrated security is equal to no. User ID is equal to blank, because as you can see user value nothing is entered here. So data source is equal to rogue server, password is equal to nothing is entered again, integrated security is equal to true. So remember how it was set before. So now the application will try to connect to rogue server with the Windows credentials it's running on, which can either be a system user on or an application pool user. Port scanning. Try to connect to different ports by changing the value and seeing the error messages obtained. So using the connection string parameter pollution attack, the attacker can also perform the port scanning by changing the values of the ports. As shown in this example here, data source is equal to my server is the actual value that is set, but he will override this using data source is equal to target server comma target port, and integrated security is changed to true. So this way you can perform the port scanning also by looking at the error messages after performing this. Next, hijacking web credentials. So using the connection string parameter pollution attack, I can even hijack the web credentials. So here it tries to connect to database using web application system account instead of a user provided set of credentials. Injects inject user value colon semicolon data source is equal to target server, password value nothing is entered, so password value colon semicolon integrated security is equal to true. So the resulting connection string will be data source is equal to my server, initial catalog is equal to db1, integrated security is equal to no, which will be changed to true at the end. User id is equal to it's blank. Data source is equal to target server, comma target port, password is equal to blank, integrated security is equal to true. Here it overrides the integrated security parameter with a value equal to true. Thus, it will allow you to connect to the database with the system account with which the application runs. So after looking into connection string injection, current connection string parameter pollution, we look at connection pool DOS. Note, a connection pool is a cache of database connections maintained so that the connections can be reused when future requests to the database are required. Connection pools are used to enhance the performance of executing commands on database. So examine the connection pooling settings of the application, construct a large malicious SQL query and run multiple queries simultaneously to consume all the connections in the connection pool, causing database queries to fail for legitimate users. For example, by default, ASP.NET, the maximum number of allowed connections in the pool is 100 and the timeout is 30 seconds. Thus, run 100 queries with an execution time of 30 plus seconds within 30 seconds to cause a connection pool DOS such that no one else would be able to use the database related parts of the application. So this is about attack database connectivity. The next videos we will see other attacks.